The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Judge William Cartwright had just smirked as he prepared to rule in favor of the two white police officers, dismissing the case without a second thought. He had done this many times before, especially when the accused officers were white and the victim was black. The case before him today was no different, or so he thought. Officer Daniels and Officer Reynolds stood confidently in their uniforms, their hands resting on their duty belts as if they already knew the outcome. Across from them, the black woman they had falsely arrested sat calmly in her navy blue blazer, her hair neatly tied back. She had been silent the entire trial, letting her public defender, a nervous young man barely out of law school, speak for her. Judge Cartwright leaned forward, his gavel in hand. This court finds that. The black woman slowly rose from her seat. Her voice was cool, steady, and razor-sharp. Before you rule, Your Honor, I'd like to remind the court that I am a United States attorney. Gasps erupted from every corner of the courtroom. Officer Daniels flinched. Officer Reynolds' smug grin disappeared in an instant. Even the public defender turned to stare at her, his mouth hanging open. Judge Cartwright blinked rapidly, his face draining of color. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The courtroom, once filled with the quiet confidence of yet another unfair ruling, was now crackling with tension. The judge's gavel trembled slightly in his grip. A U.S. attorney? The woman held up her badge and ID, letting the golden emblem shine under the courtroom lights. Her lips curled into a knowing smile as she watched the realization dawn on them all. I'd like to see you dismiss my case now, Your Honor, she said. The judge swallowed hard. For the first time in his career, he was at a loss for words. It had started 3 weeks ago, on an ordinary evening. Tasha Williams had just finished a long day at work. As a federal prosecutor, she was used to handling high-stakes cases. But outside the courtroom, she was just another black woman trying to make it through the day without incident. She had stopped by a quiet coffee shop in a suburban neighborhood to pick up a latte before heading home. Dressed in simple business slacks and a cream-colored blouse, she looked like any other professional woman. She barely noticed the two police officers sitting in their cruiser outside the shop. That was until she stepped out and heard the sharp beep of a police siren. Hey you! Tasha turned, confused. Officer Daniels and Officer Reynolds were walking toward her. Their hands rested on their weapons as if she had done something wrong. Yes? She asked, keeping her voice calm. What's your business around here? Officer Reynolds asked, looking her up and down like she didn't belong. Tasha frowned. Excuse me? Daniels narrowed his eyes. We got a report of suspicious activity in the area. You fit the description. Tasha inhaled deeply. She had seen this scenario play out too many times before. The so-called suspicious person was always black. She sighed. I just bought coffee. I work in the city. I'm heading home now. Reynolds smirked. Got any ID? Tasha reached into her purse, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. She had no reason to be afraid, but experience had taught her otherwise. She handed them her driver's license. Daniels barely glanced at it. You got anything else in that bag? He asked, his tone dripping with suspicion. Tasha's jaw clenched. Just my wallet and my work badge. Reynolds snorted. Work badge? What, you a janitor or something? Tasha's fingers twitched around her purse strap, but she kept her face neutral. I'm a federal prosecutor, she said. Both officers paused for a moment, but then Daniels chuckled. Oh yeah? And I'm the President of the United States. Tasha stared at them, realizing what was about to happen before it even began. And just like that, she was being ordered to put her hands on the hood of their cruiser. You're under arrest, Daniels said. For what? She demanded. Resisting an investigation. Tasha wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. Instead, she gritted her teeth as cold metal cuffs snapped around her wrists. A few people had gathered nearby, watching the scene unfold with varying expressions. Some concerned, some indifferent. No one intervened. As they pushed her into the back seat of the cruiser, she caught the eye of a teenage black boy watching from the sidewalk. His face was filled with the kind of fear that told her he had seen this happen before. She exhaled slowly. They had no idea who they had just arrested. The night she spent in jail was humiliating. Even after giving them her name and position, they had laughed it off, treating her like just another black woman making up stories. "No way you're a U.S. attorney," the desk officer sneered as he took her fingerprints. "Nice try, though." She spent the night in a holding cell, her mind racing. She had prosecuted countless police officers for corruption and misconduct. But this was something else. By morning, she had posted bail and gone straight to work. Her colleagues were furious when they heard what happened. "You need to go public with this," her friend and fellow attorney, Marcus, said. But Tasha wasn't interested in making a statement to the press. Not yet. She wanted justice. She wanted to see their faces when they realized what they had done. So, she waited. She let the officers lie under oath. Let them build their case with falsified reports. Let them assume they had already won. And then, in the final moments of the trial, she revealed who she really was. The courtroom remained frozen in silence. Judge Cartwright cleared his throat, but his voice was weaker now. "Ms. Williams, you?" "That's U.S. Attorney Williams," she corrected, her tone sharp. She took a step forward, watching the officers squirm. "Now, Your Honor," she continued, "shall we proceed with the real case? The one where I was wrongfully arrested, detained, and humiliated because of the color of my skin." Daniels shifted uncomfortably. Reynolds' hand twitched as though he wanted to reach for his badge, as if it could protect him now. The judge's hand hovered over his gavel. Tasha smiled. This was only the beginning. Judge Cartwright's gavel hovered in the air, his lips pressed into a thin line. He looked at the two officers, then at Tasha, then back at the officers again. His mind was racing. If he dismissed the case now, it would be obvious that he was covering for them. But if he ruled against the cops, it would expose the court's bias, his bias. Either way, he was trapped. For the first time in years, the power he wielded so carelessly was slipping from his grasp. Tasha took another step forward. "Your Honor, would you like me to repeat my request?" she asked, her voice firm but controlled. Cartwright cleared his throat. "Ms. Williams." "U.S. Attorney Williams," she corrected again, letting the title sit heavy in the air. A muscle twitched in his jaw. Behind her, the courtroom remained still, hanging on every word. Officer Daniels, who had been so smug just moments ago, suddenly looked as if he wanted to disappear. Reynolds was sweating through his uniform. The silence stretched unbearably. Then, the judge slammed his gavel down. "This court will take a short recess," he announced abruptly. Gasps and murmurs filled the room, but Tasha only smirked as Cartwright practically ran from the bench, his robe flapping behind him. The bailiff stood awkwardly, unsure of what to do next. The officers exchanged a look of barely concealed panic. Tasha turned and walked toward the wooden railing that separated the attorneys from the rest of the courtroom. Her colleague Marcus, who had been sitting quietly in the audience, immediately stood up and followed her out into the hallway. "You fried him in there," Marcus whispered, his eyes wide with admiration. Tasha exhaled, rolling her shoulders. "I'm just getting started." Marcus grinned. "The judge is scared, as he should be." Reynolds looked like he was going to pass out. "Daniels isn't doing much better." Marcus glanced back at the officers, who were still seated at their table, whispering urgently to their attorney. He shook his head. "I don't think they realized how bad they screwed up until just now. They underestimated me." Tasha had seen it before. The assumption that she was powerless, just another black woman who would take whatever injustice was thrown her way. But they had picked the wrong woman this time, and she wasn't letting this go. 3 weeks earlier, sitting in that jail cell, she had already known what she was going to do. Tasha had spent the night seated on the cold, hard bench, her arms crossed, her mind working like a machine. She wasn't angry, not in the way they expected. They wanted her to lash out, to make a scene, to react in a way that would justify their actions. But she was calm. The officers hadn't even bothered to check her credentials properly. She had told them she was a federal prosecutor, and they had laughed. And now, they would pay for that mistake. The next morning, when they released her on bail, she walked out of that precinct with a slow, steady stride, like a predator stalking its prey. She hadn't gone home to rest. She had gone straight to the office. Her boss, U.S. Attorney James Calloway, nearly lost his mind when she told him what happened. "They arrested you," he had bellowed, his face turning red. Tasha simply nodded. Calloway had run a hand through his graying hair, pacing behind his desk. Do they have any idea what they've done? Not yet, but they will. The moment the arrest report landed on his desk, Calloway had ordered the legal team to assemble. They're going to regret this, he had said darkly. Tasha had smiled. Oh, I know. Back in the courtroom, the officers were getting nervous. Judge Cartwright hadn't returned yet, and the room was still buzzing from the shock of Tasha's revelation. Officer Daniels leaned toward Reynolds. This is bad, he muttered. No kidding, Reynolds hissed. Why didn't we check her ID properly? Because she didn't look like a damn U.S. attorney, Daniels whispered harshly. Reynolds wiped a hand down his face. We gotta get out of this. We need to talk to the judge. Daniels' eyes darted around the room. He had expected this trial to be a formality, a simple dismissal, just like all the others. But now, there were too many eyes on them. Too many people watching. And Tasha Williams wasn't just any defendant. She was the defendant, the one who could end their careers. 20 minutes passed before Judge Cartwright finally returned to the bench. His face was slightly red, his hands gripping the gavel with white-knuckled force. Tasha had a feeling he had spent the recess making frantic phone calls. Maybe to the police union. Maybe to his contacts in higher places, looking for a way out. But there was no way out. Not this time. Cartwright cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. This court will now resume, he said stiffly. Tasha sat back down, folding her hands neatly on the table. As I was saying before the recess, she said, her voice casual, I expect this case to move forward appropriately. The judge hesitated, gripping the edge of his bench as if bracing for impact. Finally, he spoke. This court will hear the motion for dismissal at a later date. A calculated move. He was trying to stall, hoping this would quietly disappear. But Tasha wasn't going to let that happen. She leaned forward slightly. That's not acceptable, Your Honor. His gaze snapped to her. Excuse me? You heard me, she said smoothly. This case needs to be ruled on today. The judge's nostrils flared. He hated that she was challenging him in front of everyone. But Tasha wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. Judge Cartwright swallowed thickly, his fingers tapping against the gavel. Tasha watched him, waiting. And then, just when she thought he might try to dismiss the case anyway, a voice rang out from the back of the courtroom. Your Honor, we have new evidence. All heads turned. A man in a sharp gray suit strode toward the front of the courtroom, carrying a thick folder. Tasha's eyes narrowed. That was not part of the plan. The room buzzed with curiosity. Judge Cartwright, relieved to have a distraction, quickly straightened in his chair. And who are you? The man smirked, adjusting his tie. Special Investigator Jonathan Pierce, he said. Tasha's stomach tightened. Pierce was with Internal Affairs. And that meant one thing. The case had just taken a turn no one expected. Tasha's jaw tightened as Special Investigator Jonathan Pierce stepped forward, a confident smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. The courtroom had already been in a state of stunned silence. But now, the tension had tripled. Pierce was known in law enforcement circles as a relentless investigator, the kind who dug until there was nothing left to uncover. If he was here, it meant this case was bigger than she had even anticipated. And she didn't like surprises. Judge Cartwright, clearly grateful for the interruption, motioned toward him. Investigator Pierce, what evidence are you referring to? Pierce glanced at the judge, then at Tasha, his gaze lingering on her for just a second before he turned to the prosecution table. He placed the thick folder on the table in front of the district attorney. These are newly obtained body cam and surveillance footage from the night of the arrest, Pierce announced, his voice loud and clear. A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience. Tasha's heartbeat quickened. Body cam footage? She had specifically requested it before the trial, and the police department had claimed the cameras were malfunctioning that night. Now, suddenly, the footage existed? Her eyes flicked toward the officers. Daniels was as pale as a ghost, his mouth set in a tight line. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably, his knee bouncing under the table. They knew what was on those tapes. Judge Cartwright cleared his throat, his eyes narrowing at Pierce. And where exactly did you obtain this footage, investigator? Pierce smirked. An anonymous source. Tasha wasn't buying it. Which means Internal Affairs has been investigating this case behind the scenes, she said, her tone sharp. Pierce turned to her, his smirk deepening. You catch on quick, Williams. Oh, she really didn't like him. Judge Cartwright shifted in his seat. He looked even more uncomfortable now than before. Mr. Pierce, he said carefully, are you suggesting misconduct on the part of the officers? Pierce lifted a brow. Why don't we let the footage speak for itself? The courtroom was buzzing now. Reporters whispered among themselves. Spectators leaned forward eagerly. Tasha crossed her arms, watching as the judge hesitated. He was out of moves. Play the footage, she said before the judge could stall. Cartwright hesitated, but then, seeing no way out, he finally nodded. Very well. A bailiff moved quickly to set up the screen. A USB drive was inserted into the system, and within seconds, the grainy black and white surveillance footage from the coffee shop appeared on the screen. Tasha clenched her fists, and then, the truth unfolded before everyone's eyes. The footage started with a clear shot of Tasha walking out of the coffee shop, holding her cup in one hand, her purse slung over her shoulder. She was looking at her phone, scrolling absent-mindedly. Nothing about her body language was suspicious. Nothing about her behavior warranted police attention. Then, from the side of the screen, the police cruiser rolled up. The audio crackled to life. There she is. Officer Daniels' voice came through. She looks out of place. Tasha's blood boiled. Out of place? As the officers stepped out of the car, the footage zoomed in. She could hear the conversation as clear as day. Hey you, what's your business around here? Tasha watched her past self turn around, confusion on her face. Then came the part that made her jaw tighten. When she handed them her ID. You got anything else in that bag? Just my wallet and my work badge. Reynolds' voice was smug. Work badge? What, you a janitor or something? And then, Daniels let out a low chuckle. Nah, bro, look at her. Black woman. Nice clothes? She's either scamming or she's a lawyer. Tasha's nails dug into her palms. The entire courtroom gasped. She said she was a prosecutor. Yeah, and I said I was the president of the United States. Let's bring her in. She's probably got priors. More gasps. Someone cursed under their breath. On the screen, Tasha's arrest played out. The smugness. The way the officers twisted her arms. The way they laughed when she tried to reason with them. Then, a new angle. Body cam footage. It was taken from Reynolds' point of view. The camera was slightly shaky as he gripped her arm. Daniels smirked into the lens. You really thought we were gonna believe that U.S. attorney crap? And then, Reynolds had muttered something that sent rage burning through Tasha's veins. They always think there's somebody important. But at the end of the day, they're all the same. Silence. Dead silence. The footage stopped. The courtroom exploded. People were shouting. Reporters scrambled to take notes. The judge slammed his gavel repeatedly, trying to regain control, but it was chaos. Tasha sat still, her jaw clenched so tight it hurt. She slowly turned her head toward Daniels and Reynolds. They looked like dead men walking. Sweat dripped from Reynolds' temple. Daniels' hands were shaking. They knew. They knew it was over. Judge Cartwright's face was ghostly white. Pierce crossed his arms, looking far too pleased with himself. Well, Your Honor, he said smoothly, I'd say we have all the evidence we need, don't we? The judge opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. His voice wobbled when he finally spoke. This case will proceed to trial. Another explosion of noise. Tasha smiled. They had thought she was powerless. They had thought they had one. Now, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. And she wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. The sound of Judge Cartwright's gavel striking would barely cut through the roaring voices in the courtroom. The revelation from the body cam footage had sent shockwaves through everyone present. Reporters were frantically scribbling notes, some already rushing out to break the news. Spectators murmured, their faces a mixture of shock, disgust, and satisfaction. But the loudest silence in the room came from the defense table. Officer Daniels and Officer Reynolds sat motionless, their faces drained of all color. The weight of what had just played out before the court was sinking in. They had been caught, and there was no way out of this one. Tasha let the moment settle before slowly standing, adjusting the cuffs of her blazer. Every eye turned to her as she stepped forward, calm but commanding. "Your Honor," she said, her voice smooth but filled with unshakable steel. "In light of this evidence, I move to have all charges against me formally dismissed, immediately." Judge Cartwright hesitated. She could see the conflict in his eyes. If he ruled in her favor too quickly, he would look weak. If he dragged it out, it would be even worse. There was no way for him to save face. He knew it. Everyone in the room knew it. Finally, he sighed, rubbing his temple as if the weight of the world was suddenly on his shoulders. "This court finds that there is no legal basis for the charges against Ms. Williams. All charges are hereby dismissed." A roar of approval swept through the audience. Tasha let the moment wash over her, absorbing the victory. But she wasn't done. Not even close. She turned her gaze toward Daniels and Reynolds. "And now, Your Honor, I move to have Officers Daniels and Reynolds formally charged with false arrest, misconduct, perjury, and civil rights violations under federal law." The room exploded again. Daniels jolted upright. "What? No, that's—" Reynolds shot up too, his voice frantic. "You can't do that. We were just—" "Sit down," the officer's lawyer hissed, yanking both of them back into their seats. He was already flipping through his legal pad, clearly scrambling for a countermove. But there was no countermove. The footage had spoken. Judge Cartwright's grip on his gavel tightened. "That motion will need to be reviewed." "With all due respect, Your Honor," Tasha interjected, "the footage speaks for itself. Officers Daniels and Reynolds committed perjury today. They knowingly lied under oath. That is a direct crime against this court." The judge swallowed hard. Pierce leaned forward from his seat, clearly enjoying himself. "I can confirm that Internal Affairs has already begun an investigation into both officers. And based on this footage, I'd say an indictment is inevitable." Daniels and Reynolds looked sick. The smugness they had walked into this courtroom with was gone. Judge Cartwright looked cornered. But the reality was, he had no choice. He slowly exhaled, then nodded stiffly. "The court will formally recommend an investigation into the actions of Officers Daniels and Reynolds," he announced, though his voice was reluctant. It wasn't enough. Tasha knew that. But it was a start. For the first time since the arrest, she felt a real sense of justice. And she was far from finished. The moment court was dismissed, reporters swarmed. "Ms. Williams, what are your next steps? Do you plan to sue the department? Do you think this case will lead to policy changes in policing?" Tasha held up a hand, silencing the chaos. She met the cameras head-on. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice unwavering. "This was not an isolated incident. What happened to me happens to black and brown people in this country every single day. The only difference is, I had the power to fight back." A hushed silence spread over the crowd. She took a step forward, her stare unflinching. "This is not just about two bad cops. This is about a system that allows this to happen without consequence. And I intend to use every legal avenue at my disposal to make sure that system is held accountable." Flashes of cameras lit up the courthouse steps. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time, the law was on her side. The courthouse parking lot was eerily quiet compared to the chaos inside. Tasha stood by her car, staring out into the distance as the cool evening breeze rustled the trees. The adrenaline from the trial was still rushing through her veins, but now that the cameras were gone, reality was sinking in. This wasn't over. Not even close. Footsteps approached from behind, and she already knew who it was before he spoke. "You were a damn beast in there." Marcus stopped beside her, shaking his head in admiration. "I mean, damn. Did you see Reynolds' face? I thought he was going to pass out right there in the courtroom." Tasha smirked, but her eyes stayed on the horizon. "Yeah, but this isn't over yet. They're going to fight this hard." Marcus exhaled sharply. "Oh, no doubt. The police union is gonna come after you. The department's gonna try to spin this, and don't even get me started on that racist judge." Tasha finally turned to face him. "Exactly. That's why I have to move fast. I need to get ahead of them before they have a chance to regroup." Marcus nodded. "So, what's next?" Tasha reached into her purse, pulling out her phone. I'm filing a formal federal lawsuit against the department first thing in the morning. I'm also petitioning for both officers to be removed from duty immediately. And after that, she looked him dead in the eye. I'm going after Judge Cartwright. Marcus let out a low whistle. You're really gonna take on the whole damn system, huh? Tasha's lips curled into a determined smile. The system came after me. Now, I'm returning the favor. Marcus chuckled. Damn, I love this version of you. But just as the words left his mouth, Tasha's phone buzzed. Unknown number. She frowned, hesitating for a second before answering. Hello? A deep, unfamiliar voice came through. You need to stop what you're doing, Ms. Williams. Her blood ran cold. She straightened, her grip tightening around the phone. Who is this? A pause. A friend. A friend who knows that people like you don't win against people like them. Tasha's heart pounded. She forced her voice to stay calm. If this is a threat, I suggest you reconsider. Because I don't scare easily. A low chuckle. No, Ms. Williams. This isn't a threat. It's a warning. Walk away while you still can. Click. The line went dead. Tasha slowly lowered the phone, her pulse racing. Marcus frowned. Tasha? Who was that? She inhaled deeply, her mind working at lightning speed. They just made a mistake, she murmured. Marcus' eyes narrowed. What do you mean? She turned to him, her expression unreadable. They just let me know I'm getting too close. The next morning, Tasha arrived at the U.S. Attorney's office before the sun had fully risen. She had barely slept, but that wasn't unusual. She had spent half the night reviewing case law, drafting her lawsuit, and running through every possible counterattack that could be thrown her way. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every person who had ever been wrongfully targeted. As she stepped into the building, a familiar voice called out, Ms. Williams. She turned to see Special Investigator Jonathan Pierce leaning casually against the wall near the elevators. Tasha folded her arms. Let me guess. You're here to tell me to back off too? Pierce smirked, pushing off the wall. Not at all. In fact, I think you should push harder. She arched a brow. Oh. Pierce glanced around, making sure no one was listening before lowering his voice. I did some digging last night. Turns out, Daniels and Reynolds? They've got a history. Tasha's eyes narrowed. Go on. Pierce handed her a thin manila folder. There have been multiple complaints filed against them over the past few years. Excessive force, racial profiling, even an incident where a black teenager ended up in the hospital after one of their so-called investigations. Tasha's stomach churned as she flipped through the reports. And yet, they're still on the force. Because every single case got buried. Complaints disappeared. Witnesses changed their stories. Evidence got lost. Tasha let out a slow breath. So someone's been covering for them. Pierce nodded. Not just someone. Judge Cartwright. Tasha looked up sharply. What? Pierce tapped the folder. Most of those cases were brought before his courtroom. And surprise, surprise. Every single time, he ruled in favor of the officers. Tasha clenched her jaw. She had suspected Cartwright was corrupt, but this was something else. So, what are you saying? She asked carefully. Pierce met her gaze. I'm saying if you really want justice, you don't just go after the cops. He stepped closer, his voice low. You burn the whole system down. Tasha's pulse quickened. Pierce leaned back, flashing her an infuriatingly cocky grin. And lucky for you, I happen to have a match. Tasha slowly closed the folder, her mind already racing with the next move. She had walked into this fight thinking it was about two bad cops. Now she realized the entire system was rotting from the inside out, and she was about to set it on fire. But just as she was about to speak, her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Her gut told her to ignore it, but her curiosity told her otherwise. She answered. A new voice. Male. Cold. You were warned, Ms. Williams. You should have listened. A sharp click. Then, a loud boom. The ground trembled beneath her feet. The building's windows shattered. An alarm blared through the air. People screamed. Tasha spun around just in time to see black smoke billowing from the parking garage. And right where her car had been parked, there was nothing left but fire, and twisted metal. Marcus came running down the hall, his face pale. Tasha, what the hell just happened? Tasha's hands clenched into fists. They just made the biggest mistake of their lives. She turned back to Pierce, her eyes blazing. Let's burn them down. The smoke curled into the sky like a black flag of war. The sirens wailed. People ran in every direction, shouting, some ducking for cover, others frozen in shock. Tasha stood in the middle of it all, her pulse hammering but her mind razor-sharp. They had bombed her car. Her freaking car. This wasn't just a threat anymore. This was war. Marcus grabbed her arm. Tasha, we gotta go. This isn't safe. She yanked free, her eyes locked on the blazing wreckage. The flames danced in her reflection as she stepped closer. If she had been in that car just a few minutes earlier. No, she wasn't going to think about that. She turned sharply, her eyes scanning the crowd. Someone had done this. Someone was watching. Pierce appeared at her side, his face unreadable. You all right? Tasha let out a slow breath. No. Good, he said, rolling up his sleeves. Because neither am I. Firefighters arrived, dousing the flames, but the damage was done. And somewhere in the chaos, the people responsible for this were watching. She turned to Marcus. Get my lawsuit filed today. I don't care if we have to walk it into the clerk's office ourselves. I want this on record before they try anything else. Marcus nodded. Consider it done. He hesitated, his voice lowering. Tash, this is serious. You sure you want to keep pushing? She met his gaze, her jaw set. They just tried to kill me. You really think I'm backing down now? Marcus sighed, rubbing his forehead. Yeah, I figured you'd say that. Pierce checked his watch. We need to get out of here. Whoever did this might not be done yet. Tasha nodded, but she wasn't afraid. She was furious. And when she got furious, she won. An hour later, she sat in an undisclosed government office, watching the security footage from the parking garage. Pierce had called in some favors, and now they were reviewing every second leading up to the explosion. Here, he said, pausing the video. Look at this. Tasha leaned in. A dark SUV had pulled into the garage 5 minutes before the explosion. It lingered near her car. Then, a shadowy figure stepped out, planted something beneath her vehicle, and got back in. Seconds later, the SUV disappeared. Tasha's stomach twisted. Can we zoom in? Pierce tried, but the figure was covered head to toe in black. No distinguishing features. No visible face. But then, something caught Tasha's eye. Wait, she said, pointing. Rewind. Right there. Pierce rewound, slowing the footage down. A logo. A faint, barely visible patch on the bomber's sleeve. Her blood turned to ice. It was a police badge. Silence filled the room. Marcus let out a low whistle. Well, damn. Pierce exhaled, shaking his head. They sent a cop to do this. This wasn't some random hitman. This was an inside job. Tasha clenched her fists. They're desperate. Pierce smirked, but there was no humor in it. Yeah, and you know what that means? Tasha met his gaze, her voice like steel. It means we're winning. The next morning, she walked into the courthouse with her lawsuit in hand. Reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Questions were thrown at her like missiles. Ms. Williams, do you believe the bombing was connected to your case? Will you be seeking additional protection? Are you afraid for your life? Tasha stopped, turning toward the cameras. They should be afraid. That was all she said before stepping inside. And that one sentence? It was all over the news within the hour. Inside the courthouse, Tasha met with federal prosecutors. This is bigger than we thought. One of them admitted, flipping through the reports. If this reaches higher up in the department, we're talking about systemic corruption at every level. That's exactly what I'm saying, Tasha replied. Pierce leaned back in his chair. We need leverage. If we want to take down more than just these 2 officers, we need someone on the inside. Tasha tapped her fingers against the table. We already have someone. Marcus blinked. Who? Tasha's lips curled. Reynolds. Pierce raised a brow. You think he'll flip? Tasha leaned forward. He's scared. He knows what's coming. If we apply the right pressure, he'll turn on Daniels. And once Daniels falls, she folded her arms. They all fall. Pierce grinned. I like the way you think. Marcus smirked. Yeah, me too. But there's just one problem. Tasha arched a brow. What's that? Marcus sighed. They know exactly what we're planning. Tasha frowned. But before she could speak, her phone rang. She glanced down. Another unknown number. She answered. You're making a mistake, Ms. Williams, the voice on the other end said. Tasha's grip tightened. And who exactly am I speaking to? A short chuckle. Then, someone who doesn't like unfinished business. Then came a sound that made her blood run cold. A gun being cocked. And then, a single gunshot rang out from somewhere outside the courthouse. Screams erupted in the hallway. Marcus and Pierce immediately jumped to their feet. Tasha ran to the window. On the steps of the courthouse, a man in a suit lay motionless, blood pooling around him. Her breath caught. She recognized him instantly. Officer Reynolds. Tasha's heart pounded as she bolted for the courthouse doors, pushing past the stunned onlookers. Reporters were already screaming into their microphones. Some were running toward the scene, cameras rolling. Others stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Officer Reynolds lay sprawled across the steps, his once smug face now lifeless. Blood trickled from a gunshot wound in his forehead, staining the white marble beneath him. A clean shot. Execution style. Marcus caught up to her, panting. Jesus Christ. Pierce cursed under his breath, his eyes scanning the rooftops. Sniper, he muttered. Professional hit. No way this was random. Tasha's stomach twisted. They silenced him. Before he could flip. Before she could get him to testify. This wasn't just about protecting Daniels anymore. This was about protecting all of them. Pierce grabbed her arm, pulling her back. We need to get inside. Now. Tasha resisted. I need to. You need to stay alive, he snapped, yanking her behind a pillar just as another shot rang out. People screamed. More reporters ducked for cover. Marcus swore. They're trying to send a message. Tasha exhaled slowly. Oh, she got the message loud and clear. And she was about to send one back. 30 minutes later, she sat in a secure room deep within the courthouse, her hands folded on the table. Across from her sat U.S. Attorney James Calloway. He had been her boss for years, a man she had once trusted. But right now, she wasn't sure if he was friend or foe. Calloway rubbed his temple. Do you have any idea what you've stepped into? Tasha didn't flinch. Yes. He sighed heavily, leaning forward. Reynolds was our best shot at turning this into a full-blown case. Now, we've got nothing. Whoever is behind this is cleaning house. Then we move faster, Tasha said. Calloway looked at her like she had lost her mind. Faster? Tasha, your car was bombed yesterday. A key witness was just assassinated in broad daylight. You really want to keep pushing this? She met his gaze evenly. Yes. His nostrils flared. Damn it, Tasha. These people play dirty. They don't just kill cases. They kill people. She leaned forward. Then they should be very afraid of what happens when they fail. Calloway exhaled sharply, rubbing his face. You're impossible. Tasha tilted her head. That's why you hired me. A tense silence settled between them. Finally, he sighed. Fine. But if we're doing this, we need a new strategy. Pierce, who had been leaning against the wall quietly, finally spoke. We don't go after Daniels anymore. Tasha frowned. What? Pierce folded his arms. Reynolds was the weak link. But Daniels? He's protected. If we go for him now, it'll be like hitting a brick wall. We need to cut deeper. Tasha narrowed her eyes. How deep are we talking? Pierce smirked. Cartwright deep? The room went silent. Marcus let out a low whistle. Oh, we're really throwing hands now, huh? Tasha's lips pressed into a firm line. Judge Cartwright had been a problem for years. She had known he was corrupt. She had suspected he was shielding bad cops. But now? Now, she had proof. And she was going to bury him. Later that night, she sat in her apartment, staring at the case files sprawled across her coffee table. Marcus sat on the floor, flipping through documents. Okay, so let's say we bring down Cartwright. What's the angle? Tasha tapped her pen against a folder. We find the money. Marcus raised a brow. Bribery? She nodded. Corrupt judges don't do favors out of the goodness of their hearts. He's getting paid for this. Marcus sighed. All right, but how do we find that money? A knock at the door interrupted them. Tasha frowned, standing cautiously. She wasn't expecting anyone. Pierce had already arranged for a security detail, but something about this felt off. She grabbed her gun from the coffee table before approaching the door. Who is it? She called. Silence. Then, a quiet voice. We need to talk. Tasha's grip tightened. That voice. She recognized it. She unlocked the door, opening it just enough to see who was standing there. And when she did, her breath caught. A woman stood in the dim hallway, her face partially hidden beneath a hoodie. But Tasha knew her. Her name was Erin Cartwright, Judge Cartwright's daughter. Tasha blinked. What the hell are you doing here? Erin swallowed hard. Her eyes darted around nervously. I don't have much time. They don't know I'm here. Tasha's stomach tightened. Who? Erin inhaled sharply. My father. And the people he works for. Tasha studied her carefully. Why are you here? Erin's hands trembled as she reached into her pocket. She pulled out a flash drive and placed it in Tasha's palm. This has everything you need, she whispered. The bribes. The names. The proof. Tasha's fingers curled around the drive. Her pulse pounded. This was it. This was the smoking gun. But before she could speak, Erin took a step back. You don't understand, she whispered, her voice shaking. If you don't take them down now, they're going to kill you next. Then, a loud crack echoed through the hallway. Glass shattered. Erin gasped, then collapsed. Blood seeped into her hoodie, pooling at her feet. Tasha barely had time to react before Marcus yanked her backward, slamming the door shut. Sniper, he yelled. Tasha hit the ground, her heart thundering. Erin's body lay motionless outside, and in her hand, the flash drive, the last piece of the puzzle. Tasha's hands clenched into fists. They had just killed the only person who could expose them, and that meant only one thing. It was her turn to strike back. Tasha's breath came in short, sharp bursts as she pressed her back against the apartment door, heart pounding in her chest. The sharp scent of gunpowder lingered in the air. They had just assassinated Erin Cartwright, right outside her door. Marcus crouched beside her, gripping his own gun. We need to move. Now. Tasha forced herself to think past the shock, past the fact that a young woman had just died trying to help her, past the cold, brutal reality that the people she was up against were willing to kill anyone who got in their way. Her fingers tightened around the flash drive Erin had given her. This was it, the final piece. Whoever had ordered this hit didn't know they had failed, and she was about to use that to her advantage. Tasha shoved the drive into her pocket and grabbed her laptop from the coffee table. We're leaving, she said, already moving toward the fire escape. Marcus followed, gripping the doorknob. Pierce needs to know about this. Tasha nodded. Call him on the way. We need to find a secure location now. Marcus opened his phone, but just as he did, the apartment lights flickered, then went out completely. Darkness swallowed the room. Marcus swore. They just cut the power. Tasha's grip tightened on her laptop. They're coming. The first gunshot blasted through the front door, splintering the wood. Marcus grabbed her arm. We gotta go. They sprinted toward the fire escape. Tasha shoved the window open, the cold night air rushing in as she climbed onto the rusted metal landing. Marcus followed, just as more bullets tore through the apartment behind them. They climbed down fast, their breaths visible in the freezing air. Below, a black SUV screeched into the alleyway. More of them. Tasha cursed under her breath. We're boxed in. Marcus pulled his gun. Then we fight our way out. Tasha scanned the alley, her mind racing. Then she spotted it. An old delivery truck parked a few feet away, keys still dangling in the ignition. She pointed. There. Get in. Marcus didn't hesitate. He bolted for the truck, throwing the door open. Tasha ran behind him, but just as she reached the door, a bullet whizzed past her, grazing her arm. She bit down a cry of pain but didn't stop. She couldn't. Marcus yanked her inside, and she slammed the door shut. Drive, she shouted. Marcus punched the gas. The engine roared to life, and the truck lurched forward just as more gunfire erupted behind them. Tires screeched. Bullets ricocheted off metal. But then, they were gone. 20 minutes later, they pulled into an abandoned warehouse district on the outskirts of the city. Marcus killed the engine, breathing hard. Okay, that was too close. Tasha winced, pressing a hand against her bleeding arm. They're done playing games. Marcus looked over, his face darkening. They killed Aaron. They tried to kill us. You know what this means, right? Tasha met his gaze. Yeah, it means we end this. Tonight. Marcus nodded. Then let's see what's on that drive. Inside the warehouse, they found an old office with a dusty wooden desk. Tasha set up her laptop, her fingers trembling slightly as she plugged in the flash drive. The screen flickered. Then, dozens of folders appeared. Tasha clicked the first one. A list of names. Her stomach twisted. It wasn't just cops. It was judges, politicians, businessmen, and at the top of the list, Judge William Cartwright. Marcus whistled low. Well. Looks like Aaron just gave us the entire playbook. Tasha clicked another file. This one contained bank records, offshore accounts, bribes, and payments. Large sums of money deposited into accounts linked to Cartwright and several high-ranking police officials. But the biggest deposit? It had been made just 2 days ago. Tasha's blood ran cold as she read the memo. Final payment. Ensure Williams is silenced. Marcus tensed. They paid to have you killed. Tasha stared at the screen. Her mind flashed back to the bomb, to the sniper, and now she knew who had ordered it. Judge Cartwright. He wasn't just protecting corrupt cops. He was running the entire operation. Tasha clenched her jaw. We take this public. Right now. Marcus shook his head. It won't be enough. If we just release the files, they'll say it's fake. They'll cover it up. Tasha's eyes darkened. Then we hit them where they can't hide. Marcus frowned. And where's that? She turned to him. The courtroom. An hour later, they pulled up to the federal courthouse. Pierce was already waiting inside, his face tense. I just got word about Aaron. Tasha nodded. She died for this. She handed him the flash drive. We take it to a federal judge. Right now, we get warrants for Cartwright, Daniels, and every single person on that list. Pierce took the drive, nodding. This is enough to blow the entire department apart. Tasha exhaled. Good. Because she wasn't stopping until every last one of them fell. But just as they stepped inside the courthouse, a gunshot rang out. Tasha barely had time to react before the glass doors shattered. Security guards shouted, scrambling for cover. Marcus pulled her down behind a marble pillar. What now? Tasha peeked out, and her stomach dropped. A man stood across the street, lowering a rifle. A familiar man. Judge Cartwright. He had just taken a shot at her, and now he was running. Tasha bolted upright. We end this. Now. Without thinking, she ran after him. Marcus swore, chasing after her. Tasha, what the hell are you doing? But she didn't stop. Not this time. Cartwright had spent years destroying lives. Tonight, she was ending his. Tasha's feet pounded against the pavement as she tore through the streets, chasing Judge Cartwright. The man was fast for his age, but panic had set in. His robe flapped behind him as he shoved through pedestrians, sending startled bystanders stumbling out of the way. Stop him, she shouted. But no one moved. No one ever did. Cartwright lunged around a corner, disappearing into a dimly lit alleyway. Tasha didn't hesitate. She followed. Marcus was right behind her. Tasha, we don't even have backup. I don't need backup, she growled. Cartwright was not getting away. Not after everything. The alley reeked of garbage and damp concrete. A flickering streetlight buzzed overhead. And then, a metallic click. Tasha stopped cold. Cartwright stood at the far end of the alley, his chest heaving. A pistol was clutched in his shaking hands, pointed directly at her. You ruined everything, he rasped. Tasha exhaled slowly, raising her hands just enough to keep him from panicking. No, Judge. You did that all on your own. Cartwright's hands trembled around the gun. You have no idea what you're dealing with, he hissed. I'm not the only one. If you take me down, you're taking down everyone. Do you really think they'll let you live after that? Tasha took a careful step forward. You really think they're gonna save you? Look around, Cartwright. Reynolds is dead. Aaron is dead. They're cleaning house. And guess what? She took another step. You're next. Cartwright's eyes darted left and right, desperate. His grip on the gun tightened. I still have power. Tasha tilted her head. Then use it. A beat of silence. Cartwright hesitated. Then, the alley exploded with flashing blue and red lights. Sirens wailed. FBI agents swarmed from both ends, their weapons raised. Drop the gun. Cartwright's face twisted in horror. Pierce stepped forward, his badge gleaming under the streetlights. It's over, Judge. Cartwright's gaze darted back to Tasha. She smirked. You were saying? The judge let out a shaky breath. Then, he dropped the gun. 30 minutes later, Cartwright was in cuffs. News crews arrived just in time to capture him being shoved into the back of an armored vehicle, his face pale and sweat-drenched. The once powerful judge, now just another criminal. Tasha stood by the courthouse steps, arms crossed as she watched him disappear. Marcus exhaled. So, we won. Tasha nodded. Yeah, we won. But something didn't sit right. The way Cartwright had spoken, the fear in his eyes. He wasn't afraid of prison. He was afraid of who was coming next. Tasha turned to Pierce. We need to go through that flash drive again. There's something we're missing. Pierce frowned. You think this goes higher? Tasha's jaw clenched. I know it does. And she wasn't stopping until she found everyone involved. No matter what it took. Tasha stood in the federal interrogation room, staring at the two-way mirror. On the other side, Judge Cartwright sat handcuffed to the table, his once imposing presence reduced to that of a broken, desperate man. She had one. And yet, something still felt off. Cartwright had spent years covering up corruption, enabling violent officers, and ensuring that black and brown victims never saw justice. Now, he was caught. The FBI had the flash drive, the bank records, and the list of names. So why did he look so calm? Pierce stepped beside her, arms folded. You want to go in first, or should I? Tasha exhaled. I'll do it. She pushed open the heavy metal door and stepped inside. Cartwright lifted his head, eyes dull but aware. Tasha sat across from him, placing a folder on the table. You're done, she said simply. Cartwright let out a bitter chuckle. Am I? Tasha narrowed her eyes. You don't have an escape plan, Cartwright. You're not getting out of this. Cartwright leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. You still don't get it, do you? Tasha tapped the folder. We have the records, the offshore accounts, the payments, every corrupt deal you've ever made. There's nowhere to run. Cartwright smirked, and that sent a chill down Tasha's spine. He wasn't scared. He was waiting for something. She leaned forward. Who are you protecting? Cartwright licked his lips, eyes flicking toward the mirror. You think I was the one in charge? Tasha frowned. You were at the center of everything. Cartwright let out another laugh, shaking his head. No, Ms. Williams. I was just a piece on the board. The real players? They never sit in the courtroom. They own the courtroom. Tasha's pulse quickened. Then give me a name. Cartwright studied her. Do you have any idea how deep this goes? Tasha clenched her jaw. I don't care how deep it goes. I'm bringing all of you down. Cartwright sighed, as if he pitied her. Then you should have listened to Aaron. Tasha froze. Her hands curled into fists beneath the table. Cartwright's voice dropped to a whisper. They killed my daughter, Ms. Williams. And they won't stop until they bury you, too. The words sent an icy chill down her spine. But she refused to flinch. Then they better be ready for a fight, she said. Cartwright smirked again. But this time, there was something behind it. Sadness. Or maybe acceptance. He exhaled, leaning back in his chair. All right then. I'll tell you everything. Chapter 11. The next 24 hours were a whirlwind. Cartwright gave up names. Not just corrupt cops, but politicians, business executives, wealthy donors who owned the system. Tasha sat with FBI agents as they pored over the evidence, realizing just how big this was. The corruption wasn't limited to one judge or one police department. It spread through the entire justice system. You just cracked open the biggest case in decades, Pierce muttered, staring at the files. We're talking RICO-level conspiracy. Marcus let out a low whistle. This is gonna change everything. Tasha nodded, but a knot formed in her stomach, because they wouldn't go down without a fight, and she had just painted a target on her back. The first attempt came that night. A black SUV followed her from the courthouse. She noticed it in her rearview mirror, every instinct screaming at her. She took 3 random turns. The SUV stayed behind her. Her hands tightened on the wheel. Then, a second SUV appeared, boxing her in. Her pulse spiked. This wasn't intimidation. It was an extraction. She hit the gas. The car tires screeched as she cut through an intersection, barely missing a red light. Horns blared. The SUVs followed. Then, gunfire. Bullets shattered her back window. She swerved, heart hammering. Not today, she muttered. Up ahead, a police checkpoint. She didn't hesitate. She slammed on the horn, flashing her lights. The officers turned just in time to see her car speeding toward them. The SUVs skidded to a stop behind her. The moment uniformed cops approached, they sped off. Tasha exhaled sharply. She had survived. For now. The trial was the biggest in the country. Judge Cartwright testified, exposing the rot from the inside. Daniels was arrested. Dozens of officers followed. The police union collapsed. The justice system had no choice but to change. For the first time in years, real accountability happened. But Tasha knew the fight wasn't over. Not even close. She stood outside the courthouse, staring at the crowd of reporters. Pierce walked up beside her. You did it. Tasha smirked. No, we did it. Marcus appeared, shaking his head. And now the whole world knows. Tasha exhaled. For the first time in weeks, the weight on her chest lifted. Justice had won. And if they ever tried to take it back, she would be ready. Always.